Hey, Nico here from Zambia Flora. Time for another video. It's been a while. The last few months I have been a bit busy with doing some work out in the western part of the country. There's a few other private projects that we're kind of working on here around the farm, so that has kept me a little bit on the busier side. We've also kind of gone into the dry season. Well, I shouldn't say kind of. We have gone into the dry season. It's the cold dry season at the moment. The landscape is kind of drying out slightly. But as you can see behind me, we do have things in bloom like this aloe here. So let's go check out what there actually is growing at this time of year. So the most important early dry season flowering plants, at least in Zambia, I would probably say are the aloes. Both are indigenous ones and the exotic ones, although exotic is kind of a far-fetched considering that generally just come from South Africa. Here we have Aloe christianii. It is a grassland and woodland species, usually subject to areas that do get burnt either annually or every few years. And they produce these large racemes of pinkish coral red flowers, usually with a kind of a touch of white at the base of those tepals. Probably harder to see because of the time of day. We're in the late afternoon here. But maybe, maybe you can kind of make out that kind of color. And the sunbirds just love this. Sunbirds are our equivalent of hummingbirds in North America. But these racemes can be quite tall. Like if I straighten this one, this easily gets up to just over 2 meters tall. And as I said, these plants would normally be in areas that do get burnt. And I will be burning this grassland area this year. And you can see these dried, crusty leaves that will burn very easily, very quickly, and rejuvenate the plant for this next coming growing season. This larger plant we have is Aloe esculenta, only known from western Zambia. And I have this thanks to the late Mike Bingham, who had it in his collection. And I inherited it after his passing, unfortunately. It is a much larger plant. This is actually quite an old plant, and you can see the stem on this guy here is creeping along, but it produces these fantastic large rosettes. He's kind of fallen over this year, unfortunately. And these kind of dusky, yellowish, and bits of kind of coral in there as well. The light is not very good for this, unfortunately, at this time of day. It's a little too bright. Maybe if I stand in front of the light, we can get kind of a better shot. So these flowers don't stand out quite as much as some of the others, but I love how tight the raceme is until it opens. Almost reminiscent of snakeskin in that kind of way. So quite ornamental in the way that the bracts cover the flowers initially before they open, and slowly coming up the stem that way. This is probably my favorite aloe. Here we have Aloe chabaudii. And I wouldn't say that Aloe chabaudii is always my favorite. There are definitely some genotypes that are not very beautiful, but this plant itself is fantastic just for the size of the rosettes, the robustness and number of flowers that it puts up every year. And these plants I grew from seed from material that I collected at the top of Victoria Falls almost 10 years ago now. And you can just see this rosette is just massive, and these leaves are just absolutely fabulous in terms of their size. Usually a fantastic kind of bluey green, but now in this dry season they're starting to go a little bit more reddish, which is a nice feature of it as well. And then just the number of flowers, sheer flowers that it puts up. So it usually produces 2, maybe 3 stalks, and then is just covered, absolutely covered in the racemes. And I don't know, maybe you can see, maybe you can hear the bees are all fluttering around this at the moment. And this one will probably still be in bloom for another week and a half to 2 weeks. It is just a fantastic plant. So this one definitely has a pride of place in the garden, and is slowly producing offsets. We've got an offset down here, which is actually produced two spikes as well. So it's getting almost to the point in time where I can divide these and spread them around the garden further. So the flowers of Kalanchoe lanceolata are always kind of a nice little show at this time of year as well. These are more of a biennial in the garden, and they will come up and grow one year, usually producing a fairly large rosette of leaves, sometimes even in the same year, then also putting up the flowers during the dry season. It is a succulent, storing a lot of water and energy in its leaves and stems, and then putting out these usually much larger sprays of these pink flowers, and then dying off after the seeds have developed. It's not one that I really plant about. I kind of let it self-seed and remove as necessary, but it is a nice little shot of this kind of orangey color at this time of year, when, as you can see, the background is pretty brown, sorry. Not everything that I have at this time of year is usually about the flowers. Here we have what I usually refer to as the ghost tree, as it is leafless in the dry season, but then it also has this fantastic peeling bark that usually peels away to reveal a whitish underlayer. This still has a bit of overtones of green in it, but larger specimens can almost be brilliant white in terms of the bark that it shows. This specimen is Sterculia quinqueloba. I grew this one from seed that I collected again almost 10 years ago, and I'm just so chuffed that it is doing so well in this garden. I have it fairly easily visible for most areas, so during this time of year I can really enjoy seeing the features of the peeling bark and how bright the stem is. So this is definitely one of those trees that I'm quite proud of to have in the garden. Just take a quick second to highlight this Albuca abyssinica. Again, this is just one of those plants that seems to bloom at any time of year. This is the only one up and blooming at the moment, but they usually bloom really late dry season for us. So that's usually October, November, but then periodically any time, as this one is doing right here. And here we've saved the best for last, or at least maybe the most unexpected for last. Here we have Eulophia orthoplectra, a very late flowering terrestrial orchid, or maybe very early flowering terrestrial orchid, depending on how you want to look at it. I tend to think of that transition between the cold dry season into the hot dry season as the start of the year. So technically, the way that I would look at it, we're just getting towards the end of a growing season. But these put up their blooms during the height of the dry season. You can see here in the soil, this is last year's leaf stalk. It is quite dry. The soil is very dry, quite hard at the moment, but it has still found time and the energy to push up this fantastic inflorescence with these lovely large yellow and maroon flowers, slightly nodding. They kind of slightly face down a little bit. I have no idea what pollinates these guys, but I do have another plant that I thought was actually a completely different Eulophia species that is also putting up a flower stem right now, which would kind of indicate that it's also orthoplectra. So I'll save some pollen from this stem here, from this plant here, to look at cross-pollinating if the other one does turn out to be orthoplectra. So quite chuffed at that, and got to figure out where I'm going to put this guy into the garden, because he should be out there to be enjoyed in the garden, not here in the nursery. But with that, I'm going to leave you. I hope you enjoyed this little tour of what's blooming at this point in time in early July 2021, and hopefully I'll be back with a newer video before too long. Cheers.